Hello, and welcome to the Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Steve Van Eiderstein, and welcome as we go through to read the second chapter in the book, I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. You can get this in a reprint copy, which is this right here, Believing in False Gods, I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. It's a facsimile reprint of the original, at least this is the one I found. That's obviously the most accurate because it's literally just a copy. But I will be reading out of a original printing of I Was a Pagan from 1934. And we will be reading chapter 2, which is titled The Business of Thinking Things Out. So here we go. This is chapter 2 of the book I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. Chapter 2. The Business of Thinking Things Out. Philosophy. There must, I figured, as I wrote my book, be some purpose in living. But why? As a man once asked me. Why can't we just live along without any purpose? Maybe you could, I replied, but I couldn't. If I thought that never again could I possibly squeeze any kind of fun or satisfaction out of life for myself, if I thought that never again could I be of any help whatever to my family or to any other people, if failing fun for myself or hope for others, I thought that I could in no way serve some process of nature or some God that stands above self and society, I would lose no time in jumping out of the window. If I live for any of these things, in the hope of getting a little more fun, in the hope of being a little more help, or in the hope of serving some higher purpose which I do not understand, I would, whether I admitted it or not, be living for a purpose. If I guessed at the wrong purpose, as I had most in my own life, I would, of course, miss most of the fun, prove of mighty little use in the world, and probably fail entirely to render any higher service. And if men as a world were equally bad guessers, the world as a whole would pay the penalty in exactly the same way. Sounds familiar. Education, as I wrote in my book, is or should be a preparation for the business of living. But if nobody knows what that business really is, none of us have a chance either to give or get a worthwhile education. If, again, we do not know what we are living for when we get married, we cannot be expected to make a very wise choice of our life partner. In choosing or pursuing a business or vocation, we are likely to make just as serious mistakes. While in the larger affairs of economy, politics, sociology, and religion, people must continue in a complex muddle unless some definite idea of what they are living for can be found and applied to give these various affairs a purpose and direction. Belief in and desire for the 5 unfortunate P's, for instance, was the plan which I and most of the world had been following. It is a plan designed for living in which, as J. Franklin suggests, our job is to have as pleasant a time as possible, to enjoy life to the full, to experience as much as we can, and to take our pleasure where as we find it, because trouble will find us anyhow. With no further purpose or aim, this plan must be described as egoism. And since egoism had left me and most other people that I know with a great big unfilled gap in our lives, since century after century and generation after generation, it had brought the world to recurring states of chaos. Was it not likely that some other untried or less tried plan would prove to be the right one? Was it not possible, for instance, that, as Einstein suggests, man is here only to help other men? Was it not possible that I, as an individual, was headed nowhere, but that the human race was going to win through? If so, nothing that I did mattered, except as it contributed to the progress of society. Here was a plan with some goal, a plan with some sort of socialism or communism as its goal, a plan where the individual sacrifices self-interests for the good of the whole, a plan which, reduced to one word, I will refer to as humanism. Again, it seemed possible that the ecclesiastics might be right, and that there might be some kind of all-powerful God who created man for some purpose of his own. In that case, our only real purpose in life would be to obey the will of God, wherever that might lead, and for whatever known or unknown purpose. At the age of 15, I had acknowledged this sort of belief in God. I had done so because my Sunday school teacher was a successful Wall Street man whom I admired, and I was ready to say that I subscribed to anything that he did. I enjoyed at this time a sort of pink glow of self-approval, which lasted for about 3 days, and which formed the total sum of my religious experience. I was willing to admit, however, that there might be something in this plan which, from now on, I will describe as theism. There might, of course, be other ways to live and others to live for. So far, I had read no reference books on these or related subjects. I did not want either past or current opinion to intrude on what I thought was an original line of research. At this stage, however, I decided to check up, and I found my reasoning supported at almost every turn by philosophical thought. I found, in fact, that throughout the ages, philosophy followed far enough, had led, and could only lead to God. Plato, with his speculative theory of ideas, Aristotle with his logic, Descartes with his ontology, Spinoza with his world of eternal verities, Berkeley with his idealism, and Hegel with his trinity, and the great V.C. Kitchen with his neo-pragmatism, had come to the same ultimate conclusion. And so, too, the modern thought, after the denial of God, found in early socialistic and scientific philosophies. In the evolutionary theory of my college days, for instance, nature had been cruel and blind and red of tooth and claw. I found, however, that today such beliefs had largely given way to the emergent evolution of Alexander, the creative evolution of Bergson, or the cosmic evolution of Bodin. All admitted or presupposed the likelihood of a creative work of God. Even in pure science, among leaders such as Millikan, Eddington, and Jeans, I found acceptance of such likelihood. Millikan, for instance, said that scientists were now almost universally agreed that nature was, at heart, benevolent. And he added that the practical teaching of modern science was extraordinarily like the preaching of Jesus. This view would seem to suggest soul growth as the prime objective of existence. The trend was reaffirmed by biologists who, in the person of Dr. Henry Fairfield Osborn, stated that evolution was unquestionably proceeding in moral directions. Still, other scientists stated that there was unquestionably a force in the universe working to produce or modify human personality, and many did not hesitate to call this force the power of God. Philosophy, both past and present, in short, seemed to support my finding that we were living primarily to develop a personality or a soul in the life school God provides for such a purpose. And this being so, I had not only been bungling life, but had made an even worse guess about it than I had first supposed. Life was intended to grow souls, not fortunes, to make character, not whoopee, to gain depth of understanding, not eminence in business or social circles, to seek the will of God, not the praise of the public. I certainly had been living the wrong way to accomplish these results. Well, it would be different now. Knowing what I was living for, I at last could begin to do something about it, and I at last could begin to do something for other people. After reading my book, in fact, I was sure that the burdened world could immediately arise from its ashes. Proudly, therefore, I wrapped up my manuscript and carried it to the publisher. This publisher, happily for me, was a personal friend. He broke the news to me quite gently. This life and why, he said, is fine as far as it goes. Now write the second part and call it life and how. But life and why is the whole book, I protested. Why? What more does anyone need to know when he has learned that what he is living for? What, he replied, is the use of telling anyone why they are living if you cannot tell them how to live? With indignation, I carried the manuscript home again and sought consolation by taking the matter up with my chief drinking pal and my business partner. They, however, gave me small comfort. What, said one, do you mean by growing a soul? And, said the other, how do you grow it? Impatient with such petty minds, I laid the book at last before my old professor of philosophy. He furnished some balm for my wounds. In your own mind, he said, you have been thinking along the lines of some half dozen of the leading living philosophers. But to sharpen up your thought, try taking the high spots, boil them down into short, helpful articles with particular attention to the application of your philosophy as a guide to self-management in business, at home, and in all other departments of practical, everyday living. I followed his advice, but nothing happened. I wrote, in fact, a whole series of short articles. What else can we do in education? What else can we do for business? What else can we do about marriage? What else can we do to snap out of depression? And finally, what else can we do to be happy? I tried, as I wrote, to show just how the knowledge that we are living to grow souls could and should affect our happiness. I tried to show how such a viewpoint should and would affect our relations at home, revise the conduct of our businesses, revolutionize the methods and aims of education, solve the world's economic problems, straighten out our crooked politics, give new direction to ineffective forms of social service, and put new life into dying religion. But still, nothing happened. My articles came back from the magazines just as my book came back from the publisher. People apparently did not appreciate this sort of work, and a horrible suspicion began to dawn. Perhaps my writing did not really help them. Then, the full truth burst upon me. My new philosophy not only failed to help others, but it failed to help me. Despite my new assurance that I was living to grow a soul, I continued to live much as I had always lived. Much as in the days when, in my ignorance, I believed that I was living to grow a fortune, a family, and a thirst. There was no difference in my daily conduct, and I was no different as a man. Despite my fine article on what else can we do to be happy, I myself was actually no happier than I had been before. I was, if anything, even more discontented. Despite the recognition that marriage was a relationship for helping men and women and their children grow in soul. No new growth, excepting out of last year's clothes, could be noted in any member of my family. I found no new attitude and obtained no new results in business. I began to read no different type of book and made no change to my self-prescribed and somewhat casual course in late life education. I voted the Republican ticket and hoped for the best as usual. I was just as helpless about helping other people as I always had been. This living for God's service should finally have somehow awakened a new interest in church, but I found myself continuing to play golf or sleeping off a Saturday night hangover on Sunday morning. There was no stirring in my soul. My new philosophy of life, in short, did not seem to show itself at all in any new way of living. Then he looked back once more at Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, Spinoza, and the rest, and they had held somewhat similar philosophy. Yet, they too had failed to produce any real change in themselves. And, while they were vastly more successful in presenting their philosophies to the whole of mankind, they too had somehow failed to change the world. Men always, it seemed, had been frustrated in their aims, whether they believed they were living to grow a soul and planned to promote that end, or whether, as in my case, they had simply given way to self-indulgence. Regardless of its various philosophies, the world had continued to run in the same vicious circle of moral defeats, economic depressions, international antagonisms, armament races, and wars. Had I known then what I know now, I might have seen that my entire philosophical fiasco was, at bottom, nothing but a further assertion of egoism parading under the mask of altruism. It was just another form of self-service, disguised as social service. A desire to show off, a pretense that I was living and thinking nobly, used to hide the ignoble way that I really thought and lived. An attempt to convert the world to my way of thinking in order that I, unperturbed and undisturbed, might continue in my own way of living. My consideration for society, in short, was nothing but a subtle form of self-protection. I might also have seen that, even if it were possible to think and reason disinterestedly, philosophy, at best, could be nothing more than a point of view about life. And a point of view does not, never has, and never can substitute for a point of contact with the power that makes philosophy applicable to living. And that's it. Next week, we will be doing the review. I will go through and post my thoughts and what struck me about this. And then the week following, we will do chapter 3, which is the business of meaning well and doing badly. So, thank you all for joining me. Until next time. Thanks.